Great. I think we are now ready to get started. Very warm welcome to everyone joining us in the room, as well as those of you who are joining online. I am so excited today to have such an extensive panel with me, and I'll be introducing them as we go through the session. But first of all, I would really like to get a bit of a sense of who do we have in the room. I think this is the first time we have a policy hub in this setting, and it'd be really interesting as we're going to be discussing the important role of food policy and farming policy in the UK. How many of you in the room are either actively working on food policy, whether it's through your local authorities or as academics and researchers? Okay, we have a great number, amazing. And how many of you are just getting started and are interested to learn more? Okay, we have a few people who are new. And lastly, I think it'd be really interesting to get a sense of how many of you think that the food policy and farming policy in the UK is not going in the good direction. That was expected. And if we try to kind of granularize a bit and maybe think about how different nations are doing, how many of you would still think that the food and farming policy is not going in the good direction in Wales? Okay, many more no hands. Scotland? Great. England? Okay. So we still have a lot of work to do in England. Great. Well, the way we're going to run the session today is I'm going to set a bit of a scene, and we will then move into the Q&A with our panelists. As I said, they bring a wealth of knowledge and experience, being the policymakers themselves, as well as being actively involved with the local food partnerships, and some of them farmers as well. And having and being those double and triple headers in some case will, I think, really help us delve deeper and understand how it is to be on the giving and the receiving side of food and farming policy. So I wanted to start a little bit by setting the scene. So my name is Leticija. I am a local food policy lead at Food Foundation. We are a think tank that's been around for about 10 years now, and we've been working very closely with national government, but also working with businesses and more recently local authorities to really campaign for that healthier, more sustainable and fairer food system. And the reason why I wanted to bring this session to Oxford this year is because over the last 12 months I've been working very closely with a number of local stakeholders, universities, schools, and most notably local authorities. And I've been seeing an immense innovation and policy change happening at that local level. And I thought it'd be really great to share some of those best practices to see how and why things work or don't work. And so hopefully the session will inspire some of you who are either already involved in food policy to, specifically in this election year, to go back to your communities and work with your local food partnerships or directly with your council to accelerate the change that we so want to see in our food system for the better outcomes for us and for the planet. So I think it's really important when we think about food policy action to think about different levels of government. And I think often, and in maybe more recently now, we are seeing the important role that local governments can play. Whilst we recognize that the change is sometimes slow, they do have those powers, responsibilities, and opportunities to actually make a difference. But we mustn't forget that local authorities, councils are very stretched. I think this year we've all seen that their finances have been put to an immense test, which unfortunately does sometimes lead to that more short-termist thinking about food and farming policy. But nevertheless, we are seeing those trailblazing councils and local authorities, and we have some of the panelists who will for sure be able to share a bit more about how they have gone about actually implementing and taking some of those key levers that local authorities have at their disposal, even in this time of financial pressure. So some of the key things then that I think will be really interesting to explore in the session in terms of those key policy levers is the use of procurement, how local governments can actually go over and beyond the national government recommendations and really focus on creating and supporting those shorter supply chains, buying from more nature-friendly farmers and transforming their procurement. Also, how they can support, fund and set up their local food partnerships in bringing all of the private, public sector, academics. There's a lot of opportunity to actually set those targets and diversify the local economy. And also, I think planning and ability to use the existing council assets to actually look at how infrastructure and logistics and retail can be provided as a kind of entry points for producers, processors to be able to sell and for local people to be able to access the locally produced food. And finally, I think another lever which is really important is actually supporting and providing effort to local facilitators to actually coordinate groups of farmers, of growers to work together in being able to share the equipment, knowledge, marketing, and that purchasing power. So as we go through the session, we'll explore some of those opportunities and challenges to implement those levers, both in the kind of more urban localities as well as in more rural parts of the nation. And then how do we actually ensure that those levers are employed and effectively scaled so that we can continue advocating and ensuring the change is happening both at the local and national level. So, without further ado, I will introduce our first panelist, Sarah Pullen, who I have a huge privilege to be working with as well. She is a food system lead at Birmingham City Council, and she's been a driving force behind Birmingham's first 8-year food system strategy, which was launched in October last year. Sarah is also a behavioral scientist, and she uses her skills and knowledge in the field to tackle some of the big challenges that we are facing in the food system. So, Sarah, could you tell us a little bit more about particular opportunities and challenges that you have experienced working in such a big local authority and how you have successfully been able to incorporate some of those sustainable agriculture and food policy practices into council strategy, and then how do you actually translate it into action?
Thank you, Leticija, and thanks everyone for joining us today, online and in person. So I think one of the main things to realise with local authorities, especially large urban local authorities, is they are more complicated than you can ever imagine. I mean, I'm sure everybody imagines they're complicated, but they really are. They are Goliath systems with so many moving parts. So I've always been passionate about food, about making system change. So I applied for the job at Birmingham. I was like, well, no one else is going to fix it. I'll go do it. So my role is to lead the food system team. I'm based within the public health department, but we've taken a full system approach. So we don't just look at health because obviously it's impacted by economy, it's impacted by environment, and pretty much all the changes that need to happen are outside the sphere of the public health influence. So we took a full system approach. And the initial task, I've been there for about 2.5 years now, and the initial task is just to map out how things really work. And every single local authority is going to have its own dynamics, different types of teams. It often depends about when they were set up and how they were set up. Not every local authority is the same. They don't all have the same structure and teams. And I think one of the challenges with food procurement, particularly, is it often fits within a procurement team, which is general. They procure everything from, like, I don't know, high-vis vests to other objects as well. There's often one person that leads on food in particular, but they're not necessarily a food expert. So then people are saying, oh, whilst you're dealing with Goliath budget cuts for many, many years, and you've got these gigantic contracts that last several years, oh, while you're at it, can you just fix sustainability, ethics, and health, or, like, while you're there? They do not have the headspace to come up with the solutions and the systemic solutions that are required to achieve that. And what often happens is people campaign and say, you must do this. There is no lack of willingness. People want to make these changes happen, but they need support. They need to be able to overcome the barriers they face. So I think one of the things we've done is looked at the fact that the procurement team, I mean, most teams in councils are a quarter of the size they were even 15 years ago. So we looked as a food system team, what can we do to support this like challenging environment? And one of the things was, we've got the Birmingham Food System Strategy anyway. And then what we did was they were developing a procurement strategy to look at the school catering and the general council catering. And what we did was we rewrote parts of it for them. We were like, this is all the food policy alignment that you need. They weren't experts in that space, but we were saying, well, there's Cool Food Pledge that you can sign up to and reduce carbon impact by 25%. There's all these factors that you need to account for with ethics and making sure you're supporting small businesses. And so we rewrote the strategy to make sure that the ambition for what they're trying to achieve is in there. But then we recognised that this system is like over 20 million contract over 4 years. You can't just mix it up and suddenly go, oh, we're going to do all this extra procurement on the side for small businesses, because they don't have the teams. And actually, you do not procure food. What you procure is an organisation who has the right to then sell you food. So it's then having a completely different headspace. We go, hang on a minute, we're not buying food, we're saying to this person that schools are allowed to order from you. And then you realise that, no, actually, we need to be influencing who is able to get these contracts in the first place. And what we need is ethical middle chain actors who are supporting the very complex procurement law and the processes that must be followed. And actually, no one has the budget to spend more. So we've got to be creative. How can we take budgets from other areas and save money elsewhere? So could we subsidise the difference through public health or sustainability budgets to make up the difference for better procurement? We need to overcome logistics, because Birmingham has no connections with farms. They don't know a single farming network. There's none in Birmingham. So we have to connect to Central England and farming cooperatives, and enabling that to come together in a way that means you can still connect to delivery schedules. I mean, the logistics is one of the most expensive parts of a contract. If you can't coordinate and make it so that hundreds of schools all get their food delivered at exactly the right time, all these different contracts, that isn't a feasible solution. So if we can look at delivery hubs and coordinating approaches with farmers, that would be a huge solution there, as well as ethical middle chain suppliers. And the other area that I think could be a really fascinating disruptor to the market is to put more quality criteria on nutrient content. So if we could have soil quality leads to better, more nutritious food. So if we were able to change how we score food, so you don't need the same quantity, if you can produce half the amount with twice as many nutrients, then that's a win. So we need to start thinking about how can we be supporting innovative practices in very different ways. And I think we've got to take a system approach, and we've got to work together and understand that the councils are facing huge challenges with budgets. And if we can bring together solutions, so we've been rewriting the tender spec, contract criteria to make sure there's transparency in reporting, accountability for what policies the people we're working with are following. Have they not only got sustainable soy policy, but also making sure it's within the animal feed, having targets around there. We're also doing a review. The Food Foundation is supporting us with on the action, looking at criteria, awards and marks and sustainability, health, ethics. Like, how do you actually make that a measurable thing within the supply chain? And those sorts of things can then lead to targets. But I think I've probably gone on too long, so I'll stop there. But yeah, that's just some of the challenges that we're facing. And I think we need to be working together more and not demonise people because they haven't taken action yet, and realise that there's normally a really good reason, because it's incredibly complicated. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And I think what really stood out for me is the fact that it's not always about people not wanting to do the right thing, but it's the capacity and resources that you need to invest, and having that dedicated person and the team that Birmingham is so lucky to have is really important to act as that conduit between all of the different parts of the council and avoid working in silos. So really great to see that example. Move on to Lizzie now. So Lizzie grew up on a traditional mixed farm, and it's fair to say has a farming in her DNA. But she also has experience working in finance and event management that she left back in 2013 to study at Royal Agricultural College. And after she graduated, she set up Just Kidding, which is a kid goat farm in Cotswolds. And Lizzie also has experience working on local food policy through Feeding Gloucestershire, Food Partnership, and has served as a Deputy Vice Chair of Gloucestershire NFU. So, Lizzie, from the wealth of your experience and working with the wide range of stakeholders, and especially, I guess, in the context where you have more urban and rural districts, what are some of the key policies and support that you think are most impactful to farming communities, and how do you actually get the buy-in for those to be implemented?
Good morning, everyone. Nice to be here. I think I'll probably reinforce what's already been said, is the complexity at national and local governments. And for us as a county, we have the added complication that we've got a county council and then we've got 6 district councils within our county. And to give you an idea, we've got obviously Gloucester City, which is a very urban area, very diverse. And then we'll have the Forest of Dean, which is very rural and not as well connected to the rest of the county. We are a very large county. And I think really what's been very interesting for me as a farmer and a food producer that I directly sold everything we produced on farm, to then starting to work in this area through my role with Feeding Gloucestershire, and previously to that I was part of a Southwest pilot looking at dynamic procurement. And that pilot was being run by the Crown Commercial Services. And again, to reiterate, procurement, you know, you're ordering from paper clips to food to stationery, you know, it's everything, it's all encompassing. I think what's very interesting is you need to have the right leadership to implement change. And I think what we have to be aware of in the context of this conversation at local authorities is there's a huge amount on their plate and their agenda, and particularly at the moment where, you know, there are budget reductions, and the autumn statement didn't really do many favours for local government. But that said, they also have great levers through the devolved powers that local government now have, through planning, transport, housing, access to jobs and skills and support around that. And so I think there is an opportunity for local authorities to provide that leadership and to bring together public and private sector to look at change. For us, in the context of maybe thinking as a farmer and our more rural elements of our county, about 3 years ago, I was invited to speak to one of our economic committees at the county council. And we decided to conduct that conversation in a very tight lens, and specifically around the basic payment scheme and the fact that this was changing. And it was staggering, but the economic group of Gloucestershire County Council had not considered what that was going to mean for us as a county. And so I was very aware that I would have to put things in very sort of monetary terms to them. And I think that their eyes opened as the conversation went on. Gloucestershire, pre the reductions, was receiving just short of £40 million in subsidy to our farmers in the county. And that sort of was equating to just under 5% of the county council's spend, so to put it into context to them. And then we sort of pointed out that during the transition period of the reductions, the county would be losing £180 million in revenue that was directly going into our farming economy in the county. As I'm sure many of you are aware that, you know, £1 received in BPS actually equates to a much larger impact and ripple through the agricultural economy, whether that's vets, land agents, machinery sales, and so on and so forth. And we were really trying to highlight to them just what the farming and rural communities were facing and what was coming down the line. And that was sort of a base point for us to try and engage and to start to communicate that there was an opportunity for change, and our farms and farming communities were going to have to adapt to a very different system. In Gloucestershire, we have a lot of large landowners and large estates, and it's well known that really through the reduction of BPS that may well increase, that larger farms will become larger and small mixed farms will become more scarce, and that will have a direct impact on many areas of our county. And we try to also remind them of the tourism impact and the economic impact that comes with that. We are a bit of a tourist hotspot in Gloucestershire. We've got Cotswolds, Forest of Dean and other areas, and a lot of that is around landscape, food consumption, hospitality, and all of those would be rippled negatively from the changes that are coming through with the transition. And so I think that was our first thing, is that you've got to spike their interest and you've got to get your issue onto the radar. And I think I was going to then just briefly speak about the rural elements of sort of food and food equity. And I think the fact is that in rural communities, and Coventry University has recently completed a very interesting piece of research about rural hidden hardship, and I highly recommend looking at that report. In the Cotswolds, they did their research in the north of the Cotswolds, which is very idyllic. It's picturesque, it's beautiful, but the hardship is hidden behind that facade. And I think that for rural communities, our policy makers and enforcers need to be aware of the lack ofs, that it's not equitable to urban areas. And I'll just give one example, which we used with our MP for Cotswolds to highlight this to him, and that was DWP and job centres. So when you look at local policy, I think you've got to build a much stronger foundation, that all our communities, rural or urban, need to have equitable access to what they're entitled to. And that just isn't the case in rural areas. When did you last drive through a small village or a small rural town and see a job centre? We know when we talk about rural issues, transport comes up straight away. So you can imagine where I'm going to go with this, that if you find yourself out of work and you need to get yourself to a job centre so that you can actively be supported back into work and also have access to the benefits that our welfare state provides our individuals that need support, you need to get to a job centre. And that just isn't the access to them. They do not come out to rural areas, and the transport into our urban areas to access that support is not there. On top of that, you have huge connectivity issues, that access to these things online is also an issue. So I think that we have to highlight to our policymakers that you've got to provide everyone a level playing field. And at the moment, our rural areas do not have that equitable access. And there also are a lot of lack ofs within those areas. And I think lastly, I would just sort of touch on the fact that, with your local policy and dealing with local government, I've learned quite quickly, with no background in this, that they are very stretched and there's lots of very important things on their agenda. So really it's looking at the code benefits and a holistic systems-based approach. If you want to move your issue or your area of work up the radar, you've got to show how it connects to other areas. So you need to embed yourself in policy across multiple departments, so it's no longer siloed. And I think food is very, very well placed to do that, because I'm sure you're all aware of the ripples of food across health, economy, and well-being. So those touch points allow you to embed in a much broader net, which will hopefully allow you to generate more sustainability with your working relationship with the local government.
Great. Thank you so much, Lizzie. And I think what's really important, we need to continue emphasizing, is this whole systems approach and really thinking about how can we embed that not just kind of in one area, in one team, but across the whole council, and potentially maybe even looking at the social value objectives that we have and how they fit with the investment into the local jobs and nature recovery. So yeah, thank you so much for that perspective. We'll move on now to Wales. So Marianne Elliott is a Sustainable Food Projects Manager at Monmouthshire County Council. She also is a coordinator for Monmouthshire Food Partnership and is also currently managing projects on regenerative agriculture and local food enterprise, and is alongside her work studying for a master's in real estate and land management in Harper Adams. So Marianne, we heard at the start, a lot of people think that Wales is going in a good direction when it comes to food and farming policy, which is very encouraging. So from your perspective, and specifically in the context of Monmouthshire, how are you utilizing those policy levers and powers that you have to support the creation of better food and agricultural outcomes? And I guess, again, you'll probably have a very different perspective from some of the challenges in Birmingham. So it'd be great to hear that from that more rural county perspective.
Certainly, thank you, Leticija, and good morning, everybody. Just out of interest, we had no hands going up when people were asked about food and farming policy in Wales. Is that because everybody thinks that Wales is doing a great job, or because no one's thought of Wales? Do we have, how many people from Wales do we have in the room? Yeah, a few hands. Okay, thank you. So I think working in a local authority policy context is very interesting, because you may find, depending on the local council that you're in, but you've got a UK policy set by a government of one colour, and then that may be in direct conflict with the policy and the aspirations of your local administration. And there are some interesting questions there around the democratic side of that. You know, you've got one set of democratically elected people in Westminster and another set in your local county. And in Wales, then we have a three-tier system, because we have the Welsh Government in the Senedd in Cardiff as well. So, which, as you probably know, has been Labour-led for a long time. So there are the layers that you're working within all the time, and you can find that you're pushing in one way and coming up against a wall and being driven in multiple directions as a local authority policy maker. I'm sure that you'll find the same in Scotland. I arrived in Monmouthshire at a time of change and turmoil. We had a newly elected administration. A lot of long-serving people were leaving the authority as the Rural Development Programme EU funding came to an end. A lot of turnover, a lot of experience walked out of the door, and new faces came in. Relationships were shaken up. So it was a real time of change and uncertainty, not all easy. And I became aware very quickly that there was a certain amount of policy fatigue and strategy fatigue among key stakeholders who had frankly had enough of post-it notes and flip charts and wanted to feel that they were doing something. So although they're with a mandate to work towards the Sustainable Food Places agenda and provide a strategy, it became clear very soon that we were going to have to start with action and doing things. And very fortunately, there were some lovely opportunities came up for direct work on procurement, school meals. We got some shared prosperity funding for working with our local food businesses and food economy. Again, we're a rural area, picking up on all the points you were making about the agricultural transition, the opportunities of food, tourism, landscape. Again, we're a touristy area. Brecon Beacons National Park, Wye Valley falls within Monmouthshire. So we started by rolling our sleeves up and running projects with our farming community, with our schools, with our catering departments. And that's been so valuable because it's provided opportunities to sit down around a table, sometimes to sit down over a glass of wine on a Friday afternoon and build up some of those relationships that we lost in that period of turmoil and transition. And And everybody's been doing that, and over the past few months, we now have an overall community and corporate plan for Monmouthshire County Council set by our political administration, which is a very ambitious and flexible document with so much opportunity for food. The key priorities are that Monmouthshire should become a fair place to live, a green place to live, a thriving and prosperous place to live, and we can slot food into all those overarching ambitions. There are some direct references to the food and farming economy and land use. And now, having gone through that process, the supporting and enabling strategies are beginning to drop out of the sausage machine as well. So socially responsible procurement strategy has come up. We are working now on the economy, employment and skills strategy. The local food strategy will be going to informal cabinet in January in its first stages, first tentative steps, because we are now in a position that we can start with the post-it notes and the flip charts again, and we've built up that kind of credibility both in the organisation and with key stakeholders. But the practice of doing that work on the ground has been hugely valuable for learning where the blocks are as well. And a particular example that I might allude to is procurement. So we've heard about the challenges of procurement contracts and how they work and the difficulty with budgets and personnel and resource. We've been running a wonderful project in Wales along with Cardiff and Carmarthenshire County Councils, coordinated by Food Sense Wales, some action research of saying, okay, well, what happens if we work with our wholesalers and we get them to buy agroecological veg from independent growers and we get it delivered to our schools? How does that work? Can we do it? But what's come out of that is actually you can spend as much money as you like and as much work as you like on getting good, sustainable, ethical food into your schools. But if the environment in the dining room is such that the children can't eat it because they don't have time or they don't have the motor skills to use their cutlery, or it's too noisy, they're being hurried, they've got their pudding at the same time as their main course, what child's going to eat a bean stew when they've got a chocolate sponge pudding next to them, There's so much work to do at the other end, because otherwise that food just goes in the bin and it's been wasted. So from kind of getting under the skin of these problems and really talking to the people who are in the dining rooms facing these issues, you can start to build that whole system approach and the end-to-end picture and understand the barriers. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Marianne. I think it's really encouraging to see that even where there is that fatigue and sometimes you do feel like there's no hope, you can, with that leadership and drive, actually continue making the change, albeit sometimes slower than we would like it to be. Great. We'll move on to our next panelist. So we'll have Doug, who is an innovative regenerative farmer in Kent. And he is particularly passionate about the reversal of climate change and biodiversity collapse. He is also a co-founder of Regeneration Earth, which works with landowners to help them benefit from carbon offset and biodiversity net gain sales. He also has ample experience with the direct food supply sector and working with a wide range of local stakeholders. So, Doug, from your perspective, could you tell us about your experiences in direct supply food chain and what you have learned?
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you for inviting me along this morning to participate in this session. I was hoping for a lectern to hide my notes behind, but I'm just going to read it. So my food and farming career started when I was a young boy. I used to grow potatoes and onions and sell them to my family's pick-your-own sweet corn customers, and that willingness and desire to connect directly with customers clearly stuck with me. As our overriding business ambition is to remove as many external factors as we can and to work as closely with the final consumer as we can. In my opinion, and this may be a bit controversial, there are only two essential links in the food supply chain. The person that produced it, the primary producer, and the final consumer. All else exists to be disrupted, notwithstanding the great work that these guys do. And there are some great people out there working very hard to make the lot of producers like me a lot better. The reality is quite different, though. You know, there are an increasingly, seems that the links in the supply chain are hell-bent on trying to increase monetary value at the expense of what we see as quality and nutritional value of our food. You know, over the last 75 years, during what's been known as the Great Acceleration, where, you know, human activity has expanded, you know, and health and longevity, living standards, all seem to have been unstoppably increasing. But of course, the law of unintended consequences was poised with that well-used phrase, by me at least, hold my beer. You know, in all that time while we were slapping each other on the backs and thinking how wonderful we were for making everything more efficient and more productive, the health of ourselves, the planet's health, and our soil's health, we're all suffering in that process. You know, and our planetary issues are well known and documented, but it's less well known and accepted that both average human life expectancy in the West is now decreasing, and that the nutritional density of our food is also reducing. And we need to do something about this, and we need to do something about this bloody quickly. Excuse me, I do swear a lot. It's a sign of creativity, so I'm told. And it's no coincidence all this has been going on whilst our vital planetary support systems are also starting to fail. My family farm is in Kent, overlooking the Romney Marsh, some 60 miles from central London and about 4 miles away from the ever-growing conurbation of Ashford. We farm around about 300 hectares, a little bit owned, mostly rented, on which we have a market garden, we have free-range laying and free-range meat chickens, we have pigs fattened on local brewery waste, a herd of Sussex cattle that only ever eat forage. We have our own butcher and 24-hour vending farm shop. The farm is also host to 3 research projects where we're examining the use of agroforestry in productive, efficient systems, where we're examining biochar use as a means to carbon capture and store, but also as a means to amend soil health. And we also have a black soldier fly larvae system where we turn local food waste into lovely, juicy bugs that our chickens love, and it has helped us avoid the use of soya. You know, the research and working in close collaboration with the University of Kent really has been a game changer for us, and it's enabled us to add academic rigor to the work that we do in our regenerative system, and we tend to regard it as a restorative and circular farming system. And there are so many examples of people doing really good work, but there are people out there who will say, well, you can't prove it, none of it's scientifically proven. You know, I've had many, many spats with my mate George Monbiot about, there's no papers, there's no evidence. There is shitloads of evidence, excuse my language. The outcomes are always the same. Soil health gets better, plant health gets better, nutrient density gets stronger. We're now proving that in an academic context. We also run a thriving wedding and events business. I say we, my wife, she's the brains of the operation truly. But what that does, we run about 250 events a year, weddings and events a year, and that gives us lots of people to engage with and lots of people to sell to. And really, we're really keen on inviting more and more people to the farm. Everybody is welcome. This is an open invitation where we demonstrate what we refer to as regenerative intensification. So this is where we're producing more food using less resource whilst restoring nature. Anyone who says there are competing factions out there and none of this can work together, it's wrong. It can, and we're proving it on a daily basis. I'm a shareholder in a business called Foodari that delivers food to schools, hospitals, hotels and restaurants across the southeast. Every day, about 24 vans head out with local and seasonal food as default, but we also supply bananas, oranges, and the full range of fresh produce and dairy, because these guys, when they're going through their procurement practices, they don't want to be coming to us for the leeks when they're in season. They want to be coming to us for the leeks when they're in season, and the bananas and oranges and everything else. So we're trying to make their lives as easy as possible. And the business has morphed over the years from its inception as a purely local food business because of that reason. Whilst we were purely local, we struggled to grow the business. We really, really did struggle, and we lost a lot of money for a few years in the process. I was going to talk about Asda, but that was such a painful experience that I'm going to skip over it. Basically, don't deal with supermarkets if you can help it, to work as direct as possible with consumers. You know, the multiple retail system, I'll just summarize that a little bit really, but the multiple retail system is the most unimaginative system in the world. You know, it has a single sales strategy of price. You know, it's based on lowest price. Aldi and Lidl are busy cutting the throats of all of the other supermarkets, and they're doing it quite successfully. But there's no imagination or ability to promote quality, mainly because they're forever asking their producers to reduce cost. And quality, and often nutrition, are always the first victims of continual cost gouging. But fortunately, we're dealing with many customers who do care. You know, we deal with many Michelin-star restaurants, royal palaces. Hasten that we have a royal warrant. And a few years ago, we worked with the Royal Brompton Hospital. So we still do, actually, but we initially set up a project with an amazing guy called Mike Duckett, who was the former the catering manager at that hospital. And what we did with him, working with Mike, was we proved that we could supply local seasonal produce, cook really good, healthy, nutritional meals that would deliver multiple health and improved patient outcomes within the NHS budget. It only happened because Royal Brompton invested in kitchen facilities, but also that Mike was, you know, he was highly engaged and engaging, I hasten to add. Sadly, he passed away, about 3 or 4 years ago now, but not before he was recognised for his achievements, and his achievements really were quite special, you know. And he did inspire a few others to do similar things, but sadly, you know, still there are too few examples. Yeah, Food RE now supplies over 400 schools across the southeast, predominantly through the contract catering sector. But the company works with these guys to design seasonal menus. So we're now working with them to design seasonal menus to say, right, okay, leeks and cabbages are in season. Let's make something really exciting out of leeks and cabbages. And you can do it. Because the point is, it is absolutely right. You mentioned about getting the environment right in the dining room. If the kids don't want to eat it or can't have, then it's just a total waste of energy. You know, in Kent, we have Produced in Kent. They do a pretty good job, you know, and it's an organisation that's supported by Kent County Council, and they do a pretty effective job through a series of events and awards. And they've recently designed a food waste matchmaking service, which we're involved with, certainly with our black soldier fly larvae system. But where I believe the Kent County Council and all other county councils can do more is to ensure that their own institutions use local and seasonal and progressively invest in the facilities to enable the use of proper ingredients that local producers can supply. Nearly there. So what do I think we need to do to build a better farm-to-fork supply chain that serves both consumers and producers better? Well, for me, the solution was not to wait for anyone, but to detach ourselves from commodity production. I've been a large commodity producer, and at one stage we farmed 5,000 acres of arable crops, growing wheat and oilseed rape and beans, and we had 250,000 free-range layers. Never made a penny, hated every second of it. And I've been the guy I am today, which is a much more connected individual, and give me this any day. You know, and in 2015, I did a Nuffield study, and I went around the world and was really lucky to see some amazing businesses. But really, what I concluded was what we needed to do was we needed to remove as many external factors, risk factors, as possible. On a national basis, I think we need to start with root and branch change in how legislation is designed. There is a well-used phrase, we have a food system that pays no attention to health and a health system that pays no attention to food. This should be rammed down every legislator's throat until they act. Obesity levels are increasing, the cost of the NHS is accelerating, life expectancy is declining, and old age and end-of-life care is becoming more expensive. Poor food and sedentary lifestyles are going to break our nation unless we act. We need life cycle legislation that goes well beyond the next political cycle. And this could be made possible by non-political working groups who are charged with designing critical long-term legislation. We have the Climate Change Committee that plays a similar role with the climate. What we should have is a Health and Food Committee, and rather like the need for climate action, the best time to act to improve our food system was 50 years ago. The next best time is now. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Doug. Really inspiring to see that things do actually work and can be done if you put your mind to it. I think often when we talk about procurement, it's kind of seen as quite distance and cost prohibiting for many, but if you can prove the concept that it works, I think it will be easier to translate that across the country. So thank you for that. We have our last speaker, last but not least, going now to Scotland, Mark Hunter, who is a strategic lead for food and facilities at East Ayrshire Council, and he oversees all catering across East Ayrshire schools, corporate offices, and early years establishment and community food services. He is also very focused on reducing food waste and utilising surplus food to distribute throughout the community. And he also leads on the Community and Dignified Food Programme within the local authority. He's also a chef by trade and regularly facilitates public food demonstrations on healthy eating and educating cooking fresh food, all within the budget. And I have actually watched a few of your videos. They are great. So, Mark, one of the key levers we touched upon is public sector food procurement and the potential this has to transform our local food system. So, could you please tell us a bit more about how you have been using procurement and food sourcing in East Ayrshire to support local producers and local food economies? And what were some of the key challenges, but also how you have managed to overcome those to become so successful in it? Thank you.
Thanks, Letitia. And thanks for bringing me to Oxford, because I've never been to Oxford, so it's a very nice city so far. Don't get confused by my accent. I live in Scotland. I was born in Ireland, and I worked over the UK in the Royal Navy for so many years, so I'll come and go with whatever accent I've been used to over the last 30 years. In East Ayrshire, we started our journey. It's not new to us when we talk about these kind of things in procurement. We started our journey in 2004, so nearly 20 years. We're into our 20th year. And that all started on the back of Robin Gourley, who moved to Scottish Government in the future about health within our school meals. When we started talking, it was slow and steady. We talked to procurement, we talked to suppliers, and we said, what is it we could do? So we started off very slowly with 2 or 3 schools, mainly the high schools, and then we moved into 2 or 3 suppliers. It's evolved over the years, and in 2008 we became gold members of the Soil Association and the Food for Life, and we have been the longest serving gold member in the Food for Life for over 15 years. We're now in our 16th year, so we're very proud of that, and that is about using local. It is about cooking fresh, and about that journey, about what we did. Over the years, the procurement process has never changed. It's exactly the same as what you would do in any local authority. It's about the drive and who you have to drive that. Right? We're all passionate about cooking. Letitia said, I'm a chef by trade. I've been a chef since my dad showed me how to cook before I joined the Navy, and then I was a chef in the Royal Navy. As you go through, you go into different management systems, and you know how it is on a ship. You have to have sustainability, and you have to make sure we can stay at sea for the length of time that we need to stay at sea for. So it's always been passionate, right? And we've always been looking at that. The journey with the suppliers is more about engagement. About that drive. Our procurement side of things, we're happy to help us through that journey. but you also had the drive on the catering side, and we did lead as a catering side, and this is what you need to get on board. You need your catering teams, you need your procurement teams, and you need your local suppliers that maybe have an interest in maybe taking these contracts in the first. We also talk about route to market. If we can provide a route to market, then that's the kind of thing that will lead this, and that's what we did, and that's what we've done over the last 15 years, is to speak to different suppliers when we have renewed the contracts. Most of our contracts, in fact all of our contracts, it's a framework, it's a local and organic framework, and we still use the big suppliers for the majority of our stuff, but over 53% of my spend is with the local suppliers within the community. It's about economical growth and community wealth building. It's about putting into those contracts the words that you want to hear about sustainability, what you're doing locally, training local, right, and then obviously bringing that money back into the local economy. In East Ayrshire, we're a small local authority, but we're a rural local authority for the whole. So the logistics of that has to be discussed in any notice. We put pin notices in, we ask suppliers to fire any questions in that they may want answered. We speak to them to say, what are your concerns? And the concerns were about logistics, but we look at central drop-offs, and then when my team deliver, like, for instance, early years meals, we would take some of those products out. That's how it's evolved over the last 15 years. We're a pan-Ayrshire contract, so the other two Ayrshires can come in on the contract at any time. They don't have to do anything else. The prices are all set. All they have to do is speak to the supplier to see if they can deliver. And that's North and South Ayrshire as well, so they can come into them. So we have the conversations with our colleagues in the other local authorities. Going forward, we have the Good Food Nation Bill, which obviously sets areas of what we need to focus on. And that terms about local wellbeing, sustainability, economical growth is all part of that community plan, and that's how we're going to take them forward. We deliver over 10,000 meals just now within Ayrshire, and we have a pupil count of about 16,000, and we cook fresh within our schools, and the majority of our kitchens are production kitchens, and we have a central production kitchen just that covers the early years, and that was a strategic decision because the capacity within the universal free school meal side of things within our kitchens was taken up by the introduction of P1s to 3s, and then subsequently the introduction between 1 and 5s universal free school meals. We're saying again, we were waiting on 6s and 7s coming in. So when we talked about the dining hall experience, that is crucial. We have to do work with this universal free school meal side of things comes in. We have to do work to make sure that our dining rooms are fit for purpose, our kitchens are fit for purpose, and our staff are trained. Our staff are cooking fresh. Under our Food for Life banner, they're cooking fresh. Over 75% of our dishes are cooked on a daily basis. But again, our kitchens need to be able to do that and produce that. Storage is another issue. We talked about problems and before. So these are all things that we've looked at and we've adapted over the years, and what we're looking at again with the introduction of the P6s and 7s. We always look at getting our uptake up, and one of the key things we did this year was we introduced half-price school meals within our schools. It gives us an idea of the implications and the problems we may face with the universal free school meals, because we've seen the capacity and the uptake jump, especially within our high schools. It's went up over 28%, and this is just for the paid kids. We introduced the half-price school meals. So we've seen an element of how it's worked, but we've also seen the impact it has on our dining halls and our kitchens. So we have to look at that, and those are the kind of issues that we take forward. Going forward, we'll do another round of contracts. We do look at sustainability, but working with our suppliers is key to this. And our recent supplier is Muscale Milk, which provides our schools, all our schools in early years, and also our leisure facilities with organic milk. That's about sustainability and renewables. It comes in centrally. It goes into milk dispensers. The young people help themselves, right? And then also those containers that it comes in goes back to the supplier, which to date has reduced the single-use milk bottle that we used to give in school meals by 4 million bottles. We've reduced and taken them off the market. So we always look at those kind of things, and also we have the buy-in from our members about sustainability and how we do this. Going forward, our next round of contracts, they'll go up, but we need to look at the logistics, because as we have more demand on these young suppliers and new suppliers and existing suppliers, we need to look at the logistics, especially for rural areas. So central drop-offs, if they're keen to do a collaborative or an operative, right, that they can join with another supplier to either provide to us or to provide to the Ayrshires, then that's what we'll do, and that's what will go forward. It's giving them the opportunity to go for the route to market. If we can say you'll have this route to market, and that's what we want to do. People say that it costs more. Yes, it does. I'm not going to say that it doesn't, but we value what we put on the plate, and that's the key to what we're giving our young people. We know is healthy, it's fresh, it's local as possible. And some of them see those suppliers within their own local areas coming in, so they recognise where they're getting their milk from, where they're getting their veg from. But I was also talking to the suppliers. They talk on our behalf to a farmer, for instance, that was transitioning over to organic veg. We use organic veg under the Food for Life, but what we said was, we'll provide you a route to market while you transition. So we allowed that to happen. And I think those are the kind of conversations you need to have. We also speak to other local suppliers or small SMEs that are producing products. Now we're in talks. We have a central production kitchen, and we're in talks with 2 suppliers. One, we produce a piccalilli for them to increase their volume, and also how we can produce an organic bread for that supplier to sell in their own shops. So we have kitchens that are underutilised. We just need to use them in another way, and that gives us an additional income. And we do events, and we do large demonstrations and things like that, which brings in additional income, which helps support the cost of our school meal. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you so much for your contributions. And I think it's really interesting, again, to hear from you, Mark, about how, again, often when we talk about procurement, we have this challenges of getting the right suppliers to actually bid for the contracts, but building that relationship and ensuring that the specifications are written in a way that is actually accessible is really important, and learning how we can translate that again in other contexts. Like in Birmingham, we are starting to kind of work in that space. So I think it'll be really, really valuable if we can continue sharing that knowledge. Before we move to questions, I just wanted to kind of follow up with some of the questions for the panelists. I think what we've talked a lot about is how and what are the kind of opportunities and creating those routes to market that local authorities have. One of the things that is quite challenging is how do you actually get the funding, and how does the lack of it impact the ability to implement some of those things, and maybe specifically kind of from large local authority perspective. Sarah, would you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest challenge I find is, like, as I said, the procurement is set up to do like an over £20 million contract over 4 years. And the driver for sustainability is to consolidate suppliers to save money by having less deliveries. And to be fair, they save 44,000 deliveries. So there is undoubtedly a huge impact there. But how on earth is a small local supplier going to compete with that in any way at all? So when you realise that the driver was to reduce deliveries, and it's like, well, okay, I can't impact this on this tender. Like, we were involved like towards the end of it all going out to cabinet and so on. So, well, what can we do? And so for now, what we're doing is working with one of the big national suppliers who supplies loads of the big local authorities, and saying, what can we do with you to make sure that you're transparent? Because at the moment, you don't even know what you're ordering. You ordered just some broccoli. They'll just supply it. They'll get it from anywhere. And you don't know when you're purchasing where it's even coming from. So there needs to be a lot more transparency, things in the contract criteria, that once it's transparent and accountable, then you can set targets. You can say, we need this amount from this geographical boundary, and then you're putting the onus on that organisation to make sure that they've got those people on the books. Then we can speak to the schools, and we can speak to the caterers and say, you must be hitting this. You know, I don't know, 20% needs to be from within this boundary. But at the moment, nobody even knows what they're getting. And I think ultimately, I'd like to have a model a bit like what has been described over here, where parts of contracts are separated out. But at the moment, there is not a supplier of that within the Central England area. There is not a viable organisation that's doing something such as you are, where they are on a framework, where you can purchase from them, but that will take coordinated action. So I don't know if that truly answers what you were asking, but I think that's what's required. We need to bring people together and put them within the realms of these complex procurement frameworks. And ultimately, we just need to redesign procurement. Like, they're doing it in Europe, but now, I mean, there's got to be a benefit from Brexit if we can just do our own thing, surely. Like, let's see what we can do with procurement to not design it the same as paperclips. Like, make it so it is structured to be exactly what we're needing to do. But that will take coordinated action, and I think there's a lot we can learn from the people around the room today.
Great, thank you. Another lever that we touched upon at the start a little bit is around kind of planning and incentivizing and providing access to infrastructures, logistics and retail spaces, so that people and consumers can actually have access to that locally produced food. I was just wondering whether, maybe Lizzie, from your experience, that is something that is really important, and how do you actually create that space?
Well, that's definitely something local governments have a big impact on. So when we're looking with our VCSE sector in our county and at a district level, space is always an issue. And if you've got community organisations, whether they're running pantries or community cafes, or you're looking at sort of pop-up farmers markets and access routes to market that way, space is difficult. Well, most councils have redundant buildings, empty buildings on high streets and in other areas. And you have to also look at the infrastructure that councils own, libraries, village halls, community centres. And when you're looking in rural areas, I drive through a village to get to a lot of my meetings, and honestly, in the last 3 months, I've not seen anyone in the village hall car park once, and it's a really good, solid building with all the facilities that you could ask for. And I think that's where local authorities can help with some of that logistics and infrastructure of providing space for organisations, cooperatives, and groups of people to come together, so that a lot of things. You know, if you're looking for resilience within communities, communities need to do it for themselves, and they need the access. And if there's space to come together and for conversations to start or cooperatives to form, that will be a big step in the right direction.
Great. And lastly, I think maybe traditionally councils and local authorities were not seen as a friend, but maybe rather a foe. And I was just wondering, Marianne, you've obviously successfully worked with a number of farmers. How do you get people on your side and to actually trust and want to work with local authorities?
By trying, really. I mean, the beauty of working in a county-wide setting is that there are lots of people out there. And yeah, there are some who you're never going to reach because they want to have as little to do with the local authority as possible. There are some who crop up everywhere because they're just that sort of person. And then there are a lot of people who will maybe try once, and if you do it right, then they might come a second time. Feeding people helps. You know, we did, if I'm asking people to come to something, feed them. That's just a no-brainer, you know. And maybe people wouldn't come out for a talk about an intro to regenerative agriculture, but they might come out for a free hot dinner at the livestock market because the catering up there is really good. And then you can talk to them about regen ag at the same time. But I think actually there is a huge amount of goodwill out there and interest, and having a .gov email address does open doors. And that's one of the things that we haven't really talked about so much today, but where local authorities have a role is in facilitating. We can provide meeting rooms, to touch on your point as well. And so one of the things we've been doing in our policy work, these first steps, is opportunity mapping and influence mapping. And there are some things that, we can choose. We choose which tenants get our county farms, for instance. And then there's that area where we have some autonomy, but we have to work within guidelines, and procurement is one of them. Food safety, food standards, planning is another. Local authorities can't totally set their own planning rules. And then there are the places where you think, well, actually, the local authority has very little influence on how private landowners manage their land. But if the will is there from your elected members and other officers, then you can provide a space for conversations to happen, and you can start to have that ripple effect. Or you can provide a platform for people who are doing really good things, invite them to come and talk. And so your reach is very wide in a local authority setting. You pick your battles, I think, and the things, we've talked a lot about procurement because that is one of the things that local authorities, we buy food. It's one of our direct influences in the food system. But getting out there and listening, knowing your stuff helps. Certainly having spent some time up, studying and reading and learning about this stuff, I felt much more confident going into, walking into the livestock market and talking to people who were selling their sheep, because at least I know one end of the beast from the other, So and common courtesy, thanking people, answering emails promptly, even if it's to say, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer. It just builds up, and you're riding a tide of goodwill, because people do want to talk about this and change and make a difference.
Great. So in the interest of listening, I think we will move on to the Q&A. So we have a lot of people raising hands in the room, which is wonderful. We'll alternate between the online questions and the people in the room. So gentlemen with the glasses in the back.
Nexus between food, nature and climate change at the level of counties. And we found some startling conclusions that are absolutely mind-blowing. And I just wanted to see if people in the room or these people concord with what we found. The first one is at the county level, the councils are no longer fit for purpose. This is at a deep systemic level. It's got nothing to do with individuals at all. It's the fact that they don't have the ability to do a results-based approach. They have no theory of change. They have no spatial intelligence about how to do things where for maximum benefit. So this is a terrible decline in the past 15 years. We have incredibly strong silos, incredible people in the councils, but there's no overarching leadership. And there is no overarching leadership for systemic reasons, not individual. So there is no monitoring, evaluation and learning system. So that's an incredible opportunity to have that as a baseline, because we can only go forward. The second most amazing thing is the most powerful thing that they can do to demonstrate leadership is to produce spatially intelligent exemplars. And the missing thing in the title is land. The key issue is land, not the food and the farming. And this is what county councils have. Most of them are the biggest landowners in the county with their assets. They've also got the powers of compulsory purchase to purchase land and introduce completely new systems of governance. So again, we heard about Kent. There's lots of examples of really good spatially important exemplars. It works in this place because it's stopping the river pollution here. It works in this place because the biodiversity has been done. It works because of school children's health has done. In this place, because of the agroecology and the social and environmental dynamics.
Marianne, I'll pass the mic.
Hello, thank you. I think I slightly lost track of what the question is, but the situation that you describe is one that I would recognise, yes. Mm. Yeah. No, I think that the trajectory of cuts that you introduced at the beginning, you know, it's not a word of a lie that most teams are a quarter of the size that they were 15 years or so ago, and that has resulted in fragmentation because linchpins have gone. You've got bits of organisations, but the links between them are the bits that have been cut. I think also that topic about are these organisations fit for purpose? That's a question you could ask of many of our public sector institutions, and the truth as I see it is that the purpose has changed hugely. We've suddenly woken up to these deep systemic issues, and we're expecting our public sector institutions, and to a certain extent our private sector ones also, to react yesterday to these very deep problems and fulfill roles and functions that they were never set up to do. And so there are some really deep questions, I think, for a society as a whole, not just about land use, food and farming, but actually about what is government for? What's national government for? What's local government for? What's a health service for? And until you've answered those questions, then you can start to look at results and measurements and whether you're doing it and how you would understand whether you'd got there. But I think that sometimes we are chasing our tails in the dark to a certain extent. And as you say, that's not because of individuals, it's because of the structural context that they find ourselves in. I should also say that other panellists have far more experience than I do in this sector, so I would defer to them.
I just wanted to mention one thing. I mean, my team having a system approach, that was my decision. Like, it was a food team. I joined. I was like, well, the first thing we're doing is calling it a food system team. And then I was just saying to Leticija, like, yesterday, the planning team emailed me. I was like, that's like never happened. They said, oh, we got a meeting tomorrow. I was like, oh, I'm at a conference. But luckily someone on my team can go, because they were like, oh, we know you're the one involved with food. You must be at this meeting. So I think one of the simple things would be just to make sure there's at least some people in the organisation who are the connectors, because it is impossible. And also, the world has modernised, and councils are the same Goliath structures they were 50 years ago. That's an impossible situation. We haven't got the budget to be redesigning from the ground up. It's incredibly complicated. But I think a starting measure would be have more system teams.
Okay, we'll have another one from the room and then we'll move. We'll have lady in the back with the glasses.
Hi, thank you. There's been a lot of talk about, shortening the chains and relocalising through procurement and contracts, but I'm interested in the councils. I mean, we used to have a very efficient system of distributing fresh produce in this country through wholesale markets, street markets and shops, greengrocers, butchers, etc. And I'm interested, we have the last vestiges of this system still in this country, and it seems to me it's very unprotected and unjoined up in the council in terms of policy. So I am a council tenant. I have a food shop that was built by the local authority over 120 years ago. But my landlord in the council, there is absolutely no mechanism to evaluate what I do or why it's important. They only look at the rent I pay and maximising the income. And it seems to be, there's hundreds of council shops and street markets, and these are people who are expert in handling fruit and veg or whatever produce they're doing, but maybe it isn't regenerative or it's organic or direct source. But why aren't we supporting the infrastructure that we still have left?
I can only talk about how we do. You talk about routes to market and the little farm markets. We have the Ayrshire Food and Drink within our local authority, which sort of coordinates a lot of that. The economic development within our team, who we talk to as well about local procurement, but it's how they drive those ambitions of what the local suppliers want and want to do. we found that we did do some events, and they were the majority craft rather than food that would come along. So it's identifying where and when they do come along, and what is the need around that area of what they want to sell. In terms of us, we provide the information to any local contract that's going out, and if anybody that's interested in that, whether they do it as a cooperative, right, or as themselves, then they're welcome to come along for the procurement information session, and we'll give them advice of how to do that, and obviously maybe upscale. It is about upscaling as well. Can they deliver as well as that? But often, are they big enough, first of all, to be able to deliver to a local authority? Or could they do small pockets, if that's the sort of question you're asking?
Authority, it's about lots of small people delivering for the nation to make, fresh, unpackaged produce, unprocessed produce available. I mean, I can just about operate to make stuff available. To making it affordable is more difficult, but it also seems to me there's an issue of you could easily subsidise at the end of the chain to people to buy fresh, unprocessed produce, and get rid of all the middle bits that are trying to work out how to do this. I mean, there are people who can handle this produce. They're small, yeah, it's many small people, but they're disappearing very fast. And these are actually, council properties. Shops, street markets, not just farmers markets, but it seems to me that the street market system is underused as a way of promoting fresh fruits and vegetables and produce as well.
Potentially hard to answer that, because it is about, I suppose, the depth of where you're willing to deliver to and how you get those people in to buy your produce. I'm not sure.
This is from J. Rob. If local authorities are already suffering budget cuts to the extent that many are selling land to balance their books already, then how can local authorities form coherent food system policies without relevant land reform and/or adequate funding for implementation?
I would probably just touch on it with a little slightly different context, that obviously local government, and I'm looking at the title to remind us to stay on point, obviously in driving food and farming policy, it's not just about land. So when you look at food policy, you're also looking at things like Healthy Start, free school meals, the HAF programme. There is a huge amount of levers that the local government have. So I think that, yes, there are big issues, and I think that, in our county, they're passing, and it's going through at the moment about protecting and ring fencing agricultural land owned by the county, and trying to make it a lot more accountable if it is going to be sold and why, and then what's happening with the revenue from those sales. But those are quite big overarching issues, and I think that in the context of this conversation we can look at the other levers that the county council have that aren't also to do with their budgets. So optimising national support schemes for farmers and communities is key, and that is not coming out of any local budget whatsoever. So if you look at things like Healthy Start, the uptake of that will also support local farmers and food producers with fresh fruit and veg produce, but it's also supporting our communities, and it's coming out of a national funded scheme. So that would be my suggestion.
It's worth mentioning as well, like the Food Farming and Countryside Commission have been developing like a land use framework structure. And I think that's the sort of headspace thinking where you've got an organisation that's looking at the different levers from different perspectives and is then saying, well, actually, if you had this decision-making process, you could then prioritise using unproductive land for housing, because we do have housing shortages too, but then the productive land is used for growing, and we need to have those integrated land use framework type things. So I've got hope for that. I haven't got the headspace to do it locally, but I'm just like, please, can we have something like that on a national level? That'd be brilliant.
None of these things are impossible. What we need is deep systemic change in almost everything that we do. I get really frustrated when I hear, we hear the same issue. Oh, I can't afford to adopt regenerative agricultural practices. My argument is you can't afford not to. You have to do it. It's better for planet. It's better for you. It's better for soil. It's better for everybody. We have a more profitable business now than we ever have done in the past, being a large commodity producer. And it's the same with councils and budgets. Now, I'm not in politics. I'm never going to be in politics. I have no desire to be in politics. But someone needs to be brave enough to say, enough is enough. We need to stop. We need to rethink. We need to recalibrate and restart. And it's only when we have someone who's brave enough to do that that we'll be able to implement new systems. And wonderful to hear you talk about systems. It's what we need. We need to eliminate silo thinking, and we need systems thinking. I'm not the man to do it. I don't know who is, but lots of volunteers in the room, no doubt.
Should we have one more online question? Okay. This is from Catherine Baker. Access to land and restrictive planning rules are both barriers to small-scale growers and entry-level farmers. How can we work with local authorities to support growers in these two areas, i.e. blanket permission for growing tunnels or agricultural buildings?
So I've got a couple of examples that we can draw on from our work in Monmouthshire on this. Monmouthshire still has a number of county farms, and some of those are on very long Agricultural Holding Act tenancies. Those are inherited down generations, I think up to 3 generations. Others are on more modern farm business tenancies, which run for 5 years or so, and some of these have been coming up recently, and the landlord services team, who's responsible for scoring the tender bids, has put in criteria around food production, engagement in local community, how the land is going to be managed, who these people are. And through that, we've got some brilliant new tenants, young, dynamic new entrants coming in to work our land, and they're opening up their farms to the communities. They're running events. They're doing regen mentoring schemes that we're running. So that's one way you can be savvy about your scoring of, and these farms, they'll get 30, 40 bids, when the tender opens. So set you up your scoring criteria correctly, and then you can get the outcomes that you're looking for. We've also got a history of doing incredible edibles in Monmouthshire, which was a simple license for communities to have access to council-owned land for growing fruit and veg that was then available for anybody in the community to take. They weren't actually very successful, and our research is finding that there's actually a lot more community growing space available than there are people in the community wanting to use it. So there's either it's in the wrong place or people don't know about it. We're still working out quite what the reason is for that. But also where we know there are people who want to grow, we're looking at now how we can tweak that license so that actually it can be a little bit more exclusive, because we recognise that if you've put a lot of work into raising your tomato plant from seeds, you do actually want to have some certainty that you're going to get a tomato off it in the end, and someone else isn't going to have come and swiped them all. So adapting those licenses for community gardens for groups as a sort of, a local society to run. But you run into all sorts of questions about liability and insurance and occupiers' liability and rent and water and traffic and utilities. There are a lot of questions that as a landlord we have a statutory obligation to address, to make sure that in the event that something does go wrong, those lines of accountability were mapped out at the beginning. So it can seem very slow and it can seem very frustrating, but we try to be open about why we're having those conversations and to make space available where it's safe to do so.
Thank you very much. I heard lots of very inspiring things about what could be done at a county level or district level at the food end of the food and farming picture, and I do take the point about it being a complete integrated system. I think of it as soil to soil, not food to fork. So I am a councillor at Cotswold District, and I have responsibility for regenerative agricultures and ecology. And I happen at the moment to be the person who's contributing the agricultural end of the strategy for Gloucestershire's economic growth. So I have a real interest in this question because I'm submitting next week. So I've heard a great deal about the food end of it, and I take the point about the importance of that. But we have one estate that's right next to the biggest town in the Cotswolds, and it's as big as the town. So we put a lot of effort into the town, and we have a lot of expertise amongst officers who know all about the town and planning and all sorts of stuff, and very little about what actually goes on the land. And we have a huge tourist industry that knows very little about what they drive past. The reason I am contributing to the strategy at the Gloucestershire level is because there's a lack of expertise in terms of actually understanding farms and land. So I'm really asking the question, what can a county do? And what can a district do practically? And I take the point that farmers are quite an independent group and they will do lots of things by themselves. What do they need from us to help them to do what they can do?
That's a tricky one. Landowners and farmers are renowned for being an insular bunch. I am not one of those people. You know, I want as many people from Ashford and the local town and the county to visit my farm as possible, because every visit to the farm is an opportunity for me to communicate with them the really cool stuff that we do on the farm, our regenerative agricultural practices, our circular economy that we've developed, the fact that we no longer buy soya and therefore deplete rainforests in Brazil, the fact that all food from all of our animals is produced on the farm or from local waste streams. And what we're finding is that the communicating these messages brings us more customers. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Those customers talk to other customers. So I'm not really answering your question, but for me, what can you do? Just engage. I mean, what we found is that the more we engage with, the more stakeholders we engage with, the more we learn, the more we find out. You know, I had no idea that Kent University were desperate to engage with people like me until I reached out to them. And so I reached out to them and said, actually, we're doing all this stuff, and I'd really like to prove George Monbiot wrong. You know, can you help me with some research? And they were throwing PhDs and professors at us to help. And I think it's engagement. Engagement is what we need. Have meetings, talk to landowners. How can we bring more people onto your land, and how can you benefit? How can the people benefit from it?
For one quick question, and then we'll have to wrap up. Just have first row, shout.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, as a local farmer, that biodiversity net gain is going to be a hugely important area which local authorities will be able to pull massive levers which will get proper funding into regenerative, nature-friendly farms. So please make sure that your planning colleagues look at that and really do support small-scale farms, not big corporates who are buying up land to invest in BNG schemes which will not deliver local food. And the other thing is the closure of local abattoirs. So that's just happening in Long Compton, which is near Oxford. It's the little abattoir I use. I don't want to send my livestock to a revolting abattoir, and it's too expensive to go a lot further. So, you know, it's going to make me difficult to carry on direct sales. And so these are hugely important planning issues, and local authorities have such a lot of power. Thank you.
I just want to come directly back on the abattoir. I quite agree. I needed an abattoir for my business, and in Gloucestershire we are losing our abattoirs, and it's a massive impact. The local authorities have a direct impact on this and can work to support and to improve our logistics, particularly around the abattoirs, and it's really, really central. No abattoirs, no local produce meat. Simple as that.
Great, thank you. We are out of time, but I would first like to thank our panelists who have hopefully given some hope and demonstrated that leadership is possible at local level. There's still a lot of work to do, and we need to work in complementarity with influencing national policy. And thank you all to contributing and wanting to be part of this change. So thank you for all your questions, and have a great rest of the conference. Thank you.